Welcome to NovoEdTalks, a podcast for authentic, honest conversations about talent development and the people shaping it. On this show, we sit down with leaders across learning and development, mentorship, leadership development, HR, and people strategy to talk about what's really working, what's changing, and what they're learning along the way. These aren't surface-level interviews. They're candid conversations about building skills, developing leaders, supporting managers, and creating experiences that actually move organizations forward. Before we jump in, a quick word about NovoEd. Founded at Stanford's Social Algorithms Lab in 2012, NovoEd is a people-centric talent development platform built for enterprises and training providers. Business transformation starts with people, and people perform better on NovoEd. In today's fast-changing landscape, upskilling requires a new approach. NovoEd makes it easy to move beyond the talent development status quo by combing social, collaborative, cohort-based learning with real-world application. The result is future-ready talent built on a platform designed to turn learning into measurable impact. Now, let's meet our guests for today's NovoEdTalks episode. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the NovoEdTalks podcast, a space for talent development trailblazers to get real. My name is Melissa Fisk. I'm the producer of the NovoEdTalks podcast, and today I am joined by Brandon Springle, who is the Director of Talent Development and Succession Planning for Shaw Industries. Brandon is a strategic talent development and succession planning leader specializing in leadership development, psychological safety, organizational culture, and workforce strategy. His work focuses on helping organizations build high-performing, human-centered cultures through evidence-based approaches rooted in neuroscience, emotional intelligence, and behavioral science. Brandon brings a practical and research-driven perspective to conversations around leadership, culture, transformation, performance enablement, and the future of talent development. He is passionate about helping organizations create environments grounded in trust, accountability, adaptability, and sustainable growth. Brandon, we are so excited to hear your perspectives today. Welcome to the NovoEdTalks podcast.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here and look forward to our conversation today.
Awesome. Well, why don't you start by just introducing yourself a little bit more, your role and kind of the scope of learning or development you're, responsible for today. And, you've got such a cool background there. I'm hoping that we get into that a little bit.
Yeah, sure. So as my role today, I really focus on essentially performance enablement, performance management, and how that ties through from a systems-oriented approach to how we assess our entire workforce and look at the succession approach for the organization. In addition to that, I work with leadership development programs and really supporting all of our associates throughout the business with their talent development journeys. And that means I get into the systems like Workday and help individuals tap into how to best navigate those platforms and the user experience. So I spend a lot of time with IT, spend a lot of time with communications, and I'm locked in and focused on talent development and the strategy there within.
That's awesome. And I actually love that you have succession planning right in your title. I think that's something that we're seeing become more and more important, and more organizations start focusing on and saying, hey, this is a real problem and challenge that we need to start addressing maybe more seriously than we have in the past. So I love that you're really focused on that aspect of it too. Why don't you talk a little bit about some of the learners that you're supporting and, what pressures or challenges that are most present for them right now?
Yeah, so, I support learners really at all levels because everybody essentially is a learner. We have a learn-it-all culture as opposed to a know-it-all culture. And we support a culture where like learning continuously is the expectation. If you're not learning, you're not growing. And so the primary challenges that we see with learning really revolve around how fast things are moving and the effect of change, like when there's always this something new or all this saturation with change, that can start to stifle learning, right? And also just how do you learn faster and amplify learning with like Gen AI and agentic AI and all the different things that come into play there? How do you leverage it as opposed to letting it intimidate you, but recognize that if you build your core competence and capability, you can then use Gen AI to amplify your learning. So knowledge is now a little easier to come by, but you still recognize it's artificial intelligence and that it requires the human touch.
Yes, I love that. I like that you emphasized artificial intelligence in that part, 'cause sometimes I think we breeze over that word in the AI part of it. Um, if you had to picture kind of like an ideal state of learning or talent development, what would that look like in practice?
Yeah, the ideal state is one that's deeply connected to what it means to win. And so learning in pursuit of what? So if we're learning in pursuit of winning outcomes, then that learning feels a lot better than just learning for learning's sake. As time moves on, as life gets busy, families and different dynamics come into play. I used to just like to just learn just for learning's sake. And sometimes I still like learning some things, but now my learning is more focused on what do I want to apply? Like, I'm not just learning for learning's sake, I'm learning for application and acceleration. And so the ideal state would be clarity around what is the purpose of the learning? What does the learning lead to? And how does that then spark that creativity and that just desire and passion to pursue the learning with more just aggression and just like, I know what I want to get out of this and I'm motivated, right?
Yeah, that's probably the best answer I've ever heard to that question. And it's so, so true. Like, I don't know. There's just something so beautiful about what you just said there, and like, and really, really inspiring. Like the authentic, like want to learn, right? And I think that's absolutely the ideal state. Where do you think like the biggest gap is? Whether it's at your organization or just organizations in general, between like the ideal state and where kind of general like talent development is at today.
Yeah. I think in general, it is how fast things are moving. And it's the speed of communication to provide the clarity that what I once was focused on is not as important, and I need to pivot with agility. And I think that's the challenge everywhere you go, just because things are changing so quickly. So, what we were looking at in January, by March, it could be different, right? And so that speed of change and just the ability to then communicate with clarity and move a big ship, right? Because if it's just like, okay, I just need to communicate with 5 people, that's fine. But if I have to talk to, 18,000 people and get them on track, or 25,000 people and 30,000, 2 million, and get them on track, how do we do that in pursuit of the big win that we're all trying to get after? Because every piece is connected and everybody contributes towards the bigger picture, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I love that. How are you designing or how are you thinking about designing learning experiences to make sure that, this learning is actually sticking and that we are getting at the bigger picture?
Yeah. One of the things that's very important is creating an environment of just like social connection and relational support. So, meaning that when we come together, I understand what you're trying to achieve, you understand what I'm trying to achieve. We're getting to know each other relationally, but in pursuit of something tangible, right? So, just creating the right experiences, the round tables, the follow up, and then experiential learning, like making sure that what we provide as an opportunity has a material output. And like this is very real, important work. There's some stakes, but the stakes are not as high as I need this done or everything falls apart. You have some you have some guardrails in there, but it's still very tangible and provides a reasonable amount of challenge and pressure that encourages you to think differently and work in a way that is going to yield the best possible output. So I think just the social aspect, the connectivity, making sure those things are a part of the experience, essentially.
I love that. You said two of my favorite words there, which is the social component of it, the social aspect, and like the experience part of it, right? The more you can make something like an actual experience, I think if you think about just like our lives, what is it like? What are the things that stick with us, right? It's the experiences that we have. So I love that, and I think that's Such an important part of learning, and unfortunately, sometimes so often overlooked or easy to say, hey, let's just make sure that everyone goes through this course, check this box off, and move on, right? Which kind of brings me to my next question, which is what signals tell you that this learning is like, how do you kind of not measure that, but like what are you looking at to see that learners are actually engaged and maybe having that experience or that they're absorbing the
So now you use one of my favorite words. My favorite word is signal. I'm always looking for the signals and observing, a group of learners. And so one thing to show engagement is when I see a group taking notes and when I see a group asking questions. And sometimes I see a group taking so many notes and they're not asking questions. So I sense quiet, but I still sense engagement and them hanging on every word of what that speaker is saying and just really not wanting the speaker to stop talking so that they can continue to write. And so, but if there's the other type of silence where it's like, kind of sitting back in the seat and no pens are moving, and it's just like looking at the clock, not asking any questions. Those are signs of disengagement. And one thing as a facilitator I've learned to do is read the room. And I'll ask questions of my group when I'm training. I'm like, are you guys bored? Y'all bored right now? Group, are y'all bored? Are you having a good time? Are you happy that you're here? Just to kind of break up the monotony, I'll ask that question in the middle of a session just to see where everybody in the room is. And that helps too. And I'm checking for signals there as well. And then I recognize some folks are just tired and they're yawning and stuff is going on. So I don't let that. I look at, okay, that's an exception. That person may have had a late night. And so just always reading the room and seeing what's going on. And then the best thing is when you get questions after a session, like when people are waiting to ask you and they want to dive in and they want to send you emails, and that shows a deep level of engagement because it is engagement beyond the session, and people really leaning into something you said really resonated, and I want to make sure I connect to that in a meaningful way and continue this connection. And those are to me the best moments.
Yeah, absolutely. I think and it's almost like a vibe check, right? Where it's like, "How are we doing? Like, how's everyone doing with this?" And, like, I like that you said, there's always gonna be, like, outliers there too, but it's like, what's the general, like, feeling in the room? Like, what are people generally doing? Are they taking this in? There's been a shift from, what people call soft skills to what many people are calling like now durable or like power skills. Things like focusing on things like judgment or discernment or decision making and adaptability. How are you thinking about kind of skills development in general in this moment, like especially as AI is accelerating change?
When I look at and I looked at a report, I think it was last year, it was the World Economic Forum, I think it was the 2025 skills report. And then you looked at the top core skills for 2025, what was emerging for 2030. And the majority of those skills were in the soft skill bucket, or what I would call human interaction skills, human interaction that lead to productive outputs. Those collaborative skills that you need to work well with others. Because if I'm an individual genius in an organization, I get nothing accomplished. For a very short time, that may be relevant, but at the point in which I can't relate and connect with others, I lose my ability because even though artificial intelligence is indeed artificial, it's PhD level smart. So if I have a person that, can relate and communicate and they are amplified and they have the human touch skills, that's a powerful combination as opposed to somebody who's just smart and going back and forth with a with artificial intelligence and probably having great conversations, but they're not moving the needle because one of the core skills is leadership and social influence, right? Empathy, listening, flexibility, resilience, adaptability, even talent management comes up, which means we need to be able to have those real good coaching conversations and things of that nature. So, looking at those core skills, probably at least 50% of them were related. It probably, I think, actually more related to like human interaction or soft skills, interpersonal skill sets.
Yeah, absolutely. Like the human.
it's so like human skills are becoming so important right now, which seems like a weird thing to say, but I feel like you hit the nail on the head like perfectly by saying that. And I really like that. How do you balance kind of building these human skills or human capabilities like alongside technical or role-based skills?
I think that's such a great question. So the way I approach that question is that what is the effect of technology, right? People don't trust it. We don't know what it means. And so, how do you build trust? You don't build it with tech, you build it with the human interaction to connect it back to the tech and resolve the burden for the person, right? So, if you understand what the technology is doing and you have the communication skills to say, hey, this is how it can help you based on what you have to accomplish and what your mission is. And don't let it, scare you and don't let it move you left or right, but stand on it with your capability, your competence, and what you bring to the table and allow it to platform and elevate what you can do and amplify your effect, right? So, but if I can't communicate with the person, I can't explain that to them. And then the technology just comes in and people resist it. And then now we have tension because I'm over here using this. You don't want to. So when I can produce things, it's like, well, how did you do that? It's like, well, this is how I did it. And I tried to share it with you. And so I want to bring others along with me. I'm not looking to rise to the top. I always hear the comment or quote, we all rise by lifting others and we rise together. So helping encourage people that technology is not going to be the end all be all. Well, at least not right now, but um, just learning how to use it and keep an eye on things. Like always be a skeptic about it, and assume positive intent with the humans that you interact with within your workplace.
Absolutely. I think that becomes super important when we're talking about like AI too, because I think we're all still kind of figuring out how it's most helpful for us, right? And so I think the more we can talk about that, like with one another and be like, this is how I'm using it to do this, it inspires us to use it in other ways or refine it. So if we can just be open to having those conversations and continually talking about it or trying to understand one another and how we're all using it, I think that'll help us be even more productive or more powerful with it. How do you kind of suggest measuring the impact of learning today? Behavior change, performance improvement, things like that. And are there any kind of like metrics or qualitative signals? Again, we talked a little bit about it, but any kind of qualitative signals that carry the most weight with your stakeholders?
For me, it's like, what is the impact you're looking to make? And one of the measures I look at are, I would look at like culture or sentiment type of metrics and align those to other maybe more standard metrics with like turnover and things like that. Those are the baseline HR metrics. But then look at how are people moving and then what are the impacts and are we seeing what we intended to see? And so before you take an action, I like to do a before action review to say, hey, this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it. And then after we move to a milestone, stop and do an after action review. Okay, we just took this action. Where did we succeed? Where did we fail? The metrics that we aligned, are we seeing progress there? And you want to look at both the leading indicators and recognize there's going to be some lagging ones too, and you want to know which are which so that you're aware of what you should be trending towards to make sure you're on track for your ultimate culminating like conclusion. Like at the end, this is where I want to be, but if I don't hit A, B, and C, I'm not going to get to D. And so just the earlier your intervention and just establishing what you want to see change is the biggest thing. But behavior change is tough. And in order to have it, it really is what is the accountability mechanism that you're putting in place? Because without accountability, behavior does not change because people don't really want to make that shift unless they really deeply understand why. And there's reinforcement that the way that you were behaving before must be different. And if it's not, there's consequence, right? So that's the other part.
I love that. I've never heard anyone talk about that part of it. Everyone talks about like oh, you have to inspire behavior change, but no one talks about like, that accountability piece, which I think is so So powerful. That's a big thing I talk about a lot right now. Is just like being accountable as a person, in today's environment as well. It's like where we still need that level of accountability for our actions and for everything, for our program, for everything that we're doing though. And I think sometimes we maybe as a society have let that go a little bit. And I think I love that you just said that and brought it up, because I think that's a huge way to see if behavior change is actually happening. Brandon, going back a little bit to AI, is AI part of your learning strategy today? We've talked about it kind of informally, but are you putting it formally into any of your programs? And if so, where are you seeing the most value?
Yeah, I mean, as of right now, it really is more than just helpful in compiling emails faster. Where I've seen it most helpful is with like the 360-degree feedback. So if I'm looking to develop myself, then I can request feedback in a certain way, and then I can put it through the LLM, right? When you put it through the Gen AI platform, be it, and you should be careful what platform you use. Let me just put that out there and make sure you are following all organizational rules and things of that nature, right? But we have an enterprise tool that we use. And when we put it through that, then I can see, okay, put this in a format in which it helps me achieve A, B, and C goals that I have. So my growth and development plan, using the language generation, like you can get all the different perspectives and turn it into a single stream of intelligence that then activates my capability by helping me see every angle of myself that's been revealed through the feedback received. So that is the way I've seen it really effective in helping bring different perspectives together. And so when I collaborate with people and we then say, okay, let's get all these ideas in all of our different ways. Let's talk about what is the mission, and we can put it through Gen AI to come together with a streamlined approach with everybody's perspective considered. And I think that's how you make AI more like human, by bringing that in everybody's feedback. And so you've been able to demonstrate an inclusive approach of everybody in the room. Everybody's feedback has been considered, and you all are aligned on the direction of what's next. And so those are some I think safe and healthy ways. Obviously, we never use it to make any type of decisions or choices or anything like that requires the human judgment. But for things that are for me, like, you know, diagnose, like, what do you see within me? Like, all the way I write and the way I show up, what are my blind spots? But just don't ask AI to roast you, because it will roast you, and it will be very, very terrible. It will treat you very bad, and you will see just how evil it can be when it tells you like the things it says through a roast session. So be careful about the roasting.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think there's you got to ask it, tread lightly there. But I've found that, like I know I have like some tendencies to be very like reactionary and things. So I'm like, okay, I want to write an email back to this, and even just like using AI makes me like stop and take a beat, and it'll be like, hey, is this email that I just wrote like too reactionary? And it's like, yeah, I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna wait till tomorrow, to actually like reply to this. And I've found like that helps. So, but I love the 360 feedback, because I think that's super powerful in what you're talking about. How do you think about the trade-off between like efficiency and quality when it comes to AI?
Yeah. So most research is revealing that people are becoming less efficient and less productive as a result of improperly using AI. And it's like you really have to think about why are you using AI? Because what you don't want to do is you don't want to diminish your critical thinking capability. 10 minutes with a generative AI platform can begin to cause you to lose capacity for your critical thinking, and people don't think about it. So it becomes somewhat addictive and challenging. You got to be careful. So make sure you're only using it when you really need to be using it, and you're not using it for baseline things. And that's for a couple reasons. Number one, environmental stewardship. The more that we use something, it's literally consuming resources, right? So I try to be mindful of that and say, okay, I'm really only going to use it when it's for something tangible and something I need to get done and that I really need to use it for. And so that is where I think it helps because you're more selective about how you're using it as opposed to just that's my go-to. And then, Melissa, what happens if AI shuts down one day and you've forgotten I don't do anything without AI? Like, what if you lose your phone? Like, you don't have your phone. How do you react to that? You know what I mean? It just becomes like one of those things that if not careful, you can form a dependency on and lose that which makes you unique because the number one core skill is critical thinking, analytical thinking. That's the one that's going to continue to be at the surface and at the top because without it, then artificial intelligence becomes the intelligence.
I love that answer, Brandon. And I love, you just brought up a lot of things that I think we just don't think about when we're using AI. Like, I love the environmental responsibility component of it, right? Like, we're not really talking about how much, it takes for AI to just be AI and operate. And that's a whole factor that no one's, really screaming from the rooftops that maybe we should be thinking about. And that your point of like, okay, do we just, I mean, I've noticed I start to do it like full transparency where it's like, I'll just turn to chat GPT and be like, oh, like what would in, I don't know. And in a way that I never use like Google, so it's almost like taking it a step further where it's like, do I need to talk to someone about this right now? It's like, no, I wouldn't like necessarily Google something for more information on this topic, but it's almost like taking it a step further. And I think you're right. It can become very kind of a slippery slope there and very dark very quickly if we don't think about what that means for us as individuals.
Yeah, and I bring it up like this. I was looking at some brain scan research, and that goes back to I love to look at neuroscience, but like literal parts of your brain stop firing off after repeated use of Gen AI, like, and it just begins to dull and dim your brain. So those centers don't fire the same way when you because it's actually reshaping your mind in a way it was never intended for. We weren't designed to be leaning on artificial intelligence. We were designed to be constantly thinking and navigating this world. And so I'm always very cautious from that perspective too, because once you shift your design, same reason, like if we're on a virtual call right now, we weren't designed as human beings to communicate this way. And so when you look at the science around what are the effects of me turning my camera on, off, it's still in study because we don't know. Because human to human in-person interaction has been studied for years, but the effect post-pandemic of how we began to interact more virtually. And it's great because we have more podcasts, more information and connections like this, but we have to be more intentional about our connections on the virtual screen and just going back to human interaction. This is another level. Melissa, how do I connect to you through the screen when I've never met you, right? Like this is different. And my brain has to be navigating this whole conversation and context in a whole different way than I would talk to somebody right outside my space.
No, absolutely. And it's for those of us who are on, camera, like there's so many remote work orgs now, and like for all of us who are all remote, like how are we balancing that, and I think that's something organizations have been thinking of, obviously post pandemic and post, going back to work, not going back to work, and the benefits of both. But I love that. And I love that you have the neuroscience component to it because I am also fascinated by that. And I think that could be a whole podcast episode right there, right? Neuroscience and AI. I mean, that could be a lot of podcast episodes, but that's awesome. You started talking a little bit about it, but are there like, you talked a little bit about like personally how you maybe put some guardrails up to how you consider like using AI. Do you think there are like some organization wide or things that organizations should be thinking about in terms of how they put up guardrails or design principles around AI so that it does only enhance like human learning and connection rather than diluting it?
Yeah, I mean, that generally is a question I definitely would say would be in the legal realm, but I certainly think AI policies are very important in that they're going to be constantly evolving. And so, where you might look at a policy annually, an AI policy, you might want to look at every other month or quarterly because things are changing so fast, and there's really not a lot of regulation on it. So you need to be clear about what is your expectation in the organization. The other part I mentioned earlier is that in most cases, it's making people less productive. And so if you form a policy, it needs to be rooted in, ethics, the right way of using that so that you're using it to produce the right outputs and not working backwards. And so if you just say, hey, everybody experiment with AI, no, think about what is your most challenging stretch goal and how might AI within our guardrails help you achieve your goal in a quicker, faster, better way. That would be the sort of policy that would make sense to me is that let's make it around what we're trying to accomplish. What are we trying to accomplish? If we always center on the what we're trying to accomplish, I think things are a lot more clear about why we're doing it, what we're doing, and how we're going to go about it.
Yeah, I love that. Almost like mapping the journey, right? Before you just like jump in and start on it, where it's like, what's the end point that we're trying to get to, right?
And it doesn't mean you can't discover things along the way. So if you map your cruise journey, if you're on a cruise ship, you have some excursion stops and you don't necessarily know, maybe you haven't mapped those out, but you just know the general path of the cruise ship, right? But when you hop off the boat and you start to see what's in the general locale, oh, they have this food item, or they have this club, or they have this restaurant, and I'd like to participate in these things. And you're still discovering, you're still learning, but you get back on the boat.
Yeah.
With the
Yeah.
spirit to go. You don't want to stay off the boat because then you're left behind, and who knows when the next ship will come to pick you up.
Right. That's a great analogy. I really love that. Thinking about just kind of the industry in general, Brandon, as you look, ahead to the next few years, what do you think, L&D talent development leaders need to unlearn, and what do you think they need to double down on?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think the unlearning is just like we manage programs. Like, no, we have to activate and amplify capability. We have to be future focused to see what's shifting, what is that being, and how do we assist the change, right? Because if we're saying, hey, skills are depleting quickly, they're rapidly coming out of use. How does that feel for someone who's probably done something their whole career that we're now saying, hey, I don't think that's as valuable anymore, and I need you to learn something different. So part of it is just really how do you help people navigate change? And we have to be very good about that. The other part is communication. Like you've got to be very good in thinking about what's around the corner, what's around the bend, and how do you help other people see it with both care and challenge, which is kind of that radical candor perspective. You want to care personally, you want to challenge directly, and you want to paint a picture of reality to say, I'm not telling you this because I want you to be shaken. I'm telling you this because I care about you and I believe that you can upskill and learn these new things, but you need to let go of what you used to do. Like, because it's no longer going to service you, but the approach that you took to learn the skill still fits. And that gets after learning agility. So are you agile to let this thing go, but keep what you need from that and then move on to what's next?
Yeah. No, I love that. I think that's super important and definitely something we should be thinking about. Brandon, to close, what's one lesson you've learned as a leader that you wish you'd known earlier in your career?
Yeah. Um, the lesson I've learned as a leader is that psychological safety and creating spaces where people can truly voice what they're feeling is of the utmost importance. If you want the best of a group, you've got to create the conditions and you have to do so with intentionality. And so cultural architecture is something I came into later, learning about that. And I didn't necessarily know about it earlier. So I would find myself in situations and in previous roles and places of employment where I'm like, I don't really like what's going on around me. And I'm not sure what to do about that. And I didn't really recognize I have influence over my environment. I don't have to just sit and let things happen around me. I have to figure out what is it that we're trying to accomplish? Who is like moving the needle? Who is the influencer around here? And how do we get things on track? And in a healthy organization, that generally will work unless people are just being chaotic for chaos sake, right? So I think what I
There are
learned
those
is
people.
there are definitely those people. And so I don't dispute or dismiss anybody's perspective on that, but it's just about how can we be more intentional about the environments we create, recognizing that we're all human beings that just want to do our best. Like I don't believe people come into work wanting to be terrible or jerks, or I just don't believe that. If not, they probably would stay at home and just be grouches, but if they're coming out, they're showing up, there's a reason for that. So how do we create the best possible conditions? How do we create the psychological safety while still holding the line on accountability to make sure people understand consequence? And consequence isn't always bad. Like consequence, like if you do this and you do these things consistently, you should see this output happen that is actually favorable. That's also a consequence of what we do. So it's not always bad. When I say consequence, sometimes people are like, you're talking about punishment. Maybe, maybe not. Depends on what you're doing.
No, I love that so much, Brandon. That just like sentiment of like psychological safety and accountability and the need for like both of those to coexist like equally, I think is so important right now. So thank you so much for sharing that. Brandon, it's been a true pleasure having you on the NovoEd Talks podcast today. Thank you so much. I feel like I'm definitely going to go back and listen to this episode because I think your perspectives are just so deep, unlike other perspectives that we've heard on this show before. Not that others' perspectives aren't deep, but you just, articulated things so well. And I think our listeners are really going to love this episode. So thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, thank you. You're an incredible host, and I could see a part two in the future. So thank you. This has been a really great experience.
Awesome. And thank you for our listeners for tuning in to another episode of NovoEd Talks.